All right, Doug, today I would like to talk about China. We've discussed before that you imagine in the next decade there's going to be a hot war with China, like things are really going to flare up for a whole bunch of reasons, which we covered in another episode. But recently, there's been a lot of revelations about some of the things that the Chinese are doing. In particular, we know that the Hunter Biden stuff from the Hunter Biden hard drive and kind of certainly make it look like Biden or at least his family are compromised. There was this speech by a professor of international relations in China who said that they have people at the top of America's inner circle, like embedded or bought, or that are Chinese allies to some degree. And then there was this Axios article that came out and said there was this woman who was a Chinese spy, kind of infiltrated a lot of Democratic inner circles. So it seems like the Chinese, it's active on their part, at least they're taking the threat or us as an adversary seriously. And I just wonder what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts on the whole thing? Is China, have they outflanked us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting because it was just earlier today that I happened to be on a conference call, Zoom, with six other people. It was put together by kind of a big deal guy in Aspen, and the speaker featured was a guy named Bob Hormats. And what was interesting about that was he's a good buddy of Kissinger, and he was with Kissinger when, starting in the early 70s, he's been to China many times. And he's a certified member of the deep state.
Hmm.
This fellow that I was on a Zoom call with earlier today. And he was extremely knowledgeable, spent a lot of time in China. And of course, he is a member of the US government in many positions. You can probably Google him and see more about him. But very knowledgeable, but highly conventional. He managed to talk for an hour and answer a couple of questions that I asked him with things that you could read out of Time magazine.
Hmm.
So for what it's worth, it's just coincidental. But one thing that Hormats did point out was that talking about long-term planning, which he agrees with, they're definitely long-term people. And of course, we're quarter-to-quarter people, which you have to if you're financially desperate anyway. You have to think day to day almost. But he pointed out that in 1949, when the Communist Party took over China, Mao took over China, that they made a resolution. It's kind of written in stone that within 100 years, they were going to be an advanced country. Now, that's pretty amazing that they think in terms of 100 years from now. Also, coincidentally, with the fact we're having this conversation now, I'm reading Richard McKenna's book, The Sand Pebbles, which is a very good book and was an excellent movie about China during the 1920s, the era of the warlords. So just a little bit of background stuff. So you phrased a couple of questions, which you sent to me yesterday.
One of the biggest ones is it seems like China's outflanked us, like they're outmaneuvering us, and we're just it's like we're oblivious to even how we've exposed ourselves. And I just wonder what you think. Why are the Chinese able to?
Yeah, why are they?
Why are?
Yeah, why are they winning? Good question. So came up with a couple of thoughts on that. Why are they winning? And one, which is very politically incorrect to even mention the possibility, but it could be that the Chinese, as a ethnic racial group, have a higher IQ than basically anybody else. And there have been studies, I'm sure nobody talks about them much today, that there are groups like the Chinese and like the Ashkenazi Jews that have IQs that don't just average 100, but average 105 to 110. I mean, it makes perfect sense because, if we're choosing up a basketball team or any kind of an athletic team, I'm going to automatically take the black guys. That's who I want on my side.
Yep.
And if we're going to do mathematical problems and other intellectual things, I'll take the Chinese. And this is represented in our colleges today. There's not too many Chinese basketball players. Forget about the NBA, but even in even on college teams.
Right.
And, the Orientals are discriminated against because they're winning all the prizes in college. They can't even get into college
That's right.
because there's not enough room for, other third world type people. So I think that that's possible. They're just smarter. Okay, got to look at that. Another reason is that China as a society wastes much less time on politically correct stuff, suing each other. I mean, there's not a lot of lawyers there, not a lot of lawsuits, not a lot of wasted capital that way. They don't go out of their way to try to elevate minorities. It's a pure meritocracy. If you're smart, you go up. If you're not so smart, you're taking out human waste. That's just the way it is. Okay, so that's working to their advantage. Another reason, and another is that they're. What did I write down here? Why are they winning? This is interesting from a political point of view. It's very easy for the Chinese to infiltrate and spy upon the US if they choose to, because we're a multicultural society. But it's very hard for the Guailos to spy upon China because, well, you're not Chinese and you're never going to be Chinese. So, of course, you're not going to be able to get into the upper ranks of society. Incidentally, Bob Hormats, when I asked him, well, what about this professor that said that we're connected in the highest levels of the US government? And he basically poo-pooed that. He says, yes, I know all these guys. I know, name these people that are now in the Biden regime. He knows them all. He says, they're all stand-up guys. They're all true patriots. They're all blah, blah, blah. So what do you expect him to say? One deep state guy defends another deep state guy.
Yeah.
So, but I think those three reasons, and I'm sure there are others.
What about
that's why the Chinese are winning.
Are there cultural differences though? One of the things I was thinking as I was watching that segment and hearing, actually looking at these three different areas where it seems like the Chinese are outmaneuvering us. It's almost like we're hurting ourselves in a big way. And I just wonder, is there a cultural difference, or what cultural differences do you think there are that maybe make it so that we are, well, I guess, how do I say this? So we talked already about the Chinese had a 100-year plan, and the U.S. doesn't seem to have even a plan for, budget for next year. So are there other ways that are culturally, or just the way we believe in ourselves, or the way, our values, that maybe make it so that we're more constrained to compete with them?
Yeah, and that leads to a cultural type of thing. The Chinese have cultivated something that's known as the Confucian ethic ever since the days of Confucius, which is to say like the 4th century BC, more or less. It's funny, all over the world, in China, with both Confucius and Lao Tse, were more or less contemporary with Socrates and Aristotle and the pre-Socratics in Greece. It's strange that there were things happening in China and Greece simultaneously. But in any event, this Confucian ethic, which is basically about you have a place in society and the honorable thing to do is to, obey and listen to the people that are above you and be harmonious. Don't argue, stay away from lawsuits, be harmonious. And there's much to be said for that. And, the fact that that Mao and the communists took over China from 1949 to, well, let's say about 1980, when that was thrown out and Deng said it's glorious to be rich and so forth. Mao was just another corrupt emperor, of which they've had many. But that Confucian ethic of working together and so forth is pretty ingrained and has been for centuries in China. And it's still there. Whereas in the US, they don't value competition. They value cooperation as a cultural value. And we value competition. Well, there's advantages to both. But at this stage, since the US has turned into a degenerate society, a degenerate multicultural empire, they look better at the moment. But at the same time, there aren't a lot of Steve Jobs types inventing computers in their garages the way there are here.
Hmm.
So it ain't over till it's over, but they're definitely in the ascendant for many reasons at this point. So
Just
another one,
go ahead, please. No, go ahead.
another one is that all ethnic groups, all races, if you would, are racist. They really are. I mean, the Japanese thought racially they were better than anybody else, and the Germans thought that, some time ago. Now they think they're the poorest and the worst of people. I mean, they're, it's every race thinks that. Well, not every race. Some races are so beaten down that they really feel inferior but the Chinese have always felt that they're way superior to anybody else. And that could have something to do with it as well. I mean, that's not a good thing to feel that you're a smart thing to feel that you're superior. But it's an element. It leads to their cooperating and treating everybody else as not somebody to be cooperated with because they're outsiders.
Right.
Different from the way we look at it. They're not going to have a race war within China. We might have a race war within the US, which doesn't augur well. So here's another thing. The Chinese actually believe in their system. They really do, generally speaking. Everybody cavils and, there's a riot because something goes wrong and whatnot. But they believe in their system. They believe in their own superiority. Americans no longer believe in the idea of America. The idea of America has been flushed down the toilet, quite frankly. So that helps.
Not only do we not believe in America, we don't believe in any, we don't believe in any of the institutions we have. They've all proven to be utter failures. We don't believe in personal responsibility even anymore, like these core values that would drive people, work ethic, like you're kind of a sucker if you're working really, really hard to achieve something. Even success is seen as bad, right? If you're rich, then it must mean you've, expropriated from somebody else.
Yeah. And the Chinese don't feel that way. So, I'm afraid that at this point, because America has lost its culture, it really has. And the Chinese are still maintaining theirs, notwithstanding the fact that they're ostensibly communist. It's not a communist country, incidentally. That's a total misnomer. They have the Communist Party, but that's just a name for the deep state in China. That's the Communist Party is the equivalent of our deep state. It's just a scam for the people that are on top to stay on top. But they're not a communist country. That's ridiculous. I mean, there's very few things that are owned by the country or the nation. I mean, it's very privatized. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that if I was an entrepreneur and I wanted to start a factory or a business, it would be a lot easier to start it in China than it would be in a place like California.
Wow, that's a big.
It really is. They're encouraged and they don't bother you as long as you keep your mouth shut about politics and pay your taxes. Otherwise, it's actually pretty laissez-faire. So I think Americans have the wrong idea about China. So anyway,
are there consistencies between? We're like the United States is like the declining power now, and China, at least in their mind, is the rising power, and it certainly seems like there's a lot of truth to that. Are there commonalities historically, that cultures that are declining seem to have, and the same on the other side, commonalities between cultures that are on the rising side of things?
Yeah, and this was a question I also phrased to my deep state friend Hormats, and he's not a friend, but we were friendly on the conference call. It's that what about Thucydides' dilemma, where a power that's on the slippery slope figures we better strike now, or we're not going to be able to later because they're going to be more powerful. So we better take them down now. And it was pretty much the same situation that the Soviets were confronting during the 80s when the same thing, they could say, if we strike against the US now, we might win if it's just, but if we wait, we're just, and they were right. Well, thankfully they didn't strike, but who knows? The US and its generals might well do so. And Hormats, as a deep state member, would not address that. He went around it. So anyway, but yeah, that's a problem. I mean, the big danger right now is the US. I mean, I'm sure these people in Washington are contemplating exactly this problem, that the Chinese Navy now, is about the same size and number of ships, not in strength, with that of the US. And if the US Navy goes off the coast of China, I mean, they're just going to be sitting ducks for, Chinese missiles launched from land. So it's a problem. I don't know what the Americans are going to do, but
it seems like culturally, my big question is, are there cultural traits that almost guarantee the decline of a power, whether you have a larger navy or more, advanced weapons or whatever, but that, there's maybe a seed of cultural poison that might be in countries that tend to be on the decline? Or is it just economically driven? I mean, what causes it historically?
Well, it seems like empires, and the US is in fact a multicultural domestic empire at this point, become more bureaucratic and more politicized and less win-win, going back to what we were talking about with the two books yesterday, and more get what I can and the devil take the hindmost. And that's the stage where we are right now. So that really works against us. It consumes huge amounts of capital. I mean, look, the US spends about $1 trillion a year all in on its military and the security state. And that's all consumption. That's wasted capital. That's all capital, that $1 trillion, which could be used productively to advance science and technology and the standard of living. But it's just kind of pissed down a hole with all these junk weapons. And most of the weapons we have now are junk weapons anyway, another subject. And so the Chinese aren't doing that to the degree we are. They're spending a lot less on military, and it seems like a lot less efficiently, a lot more efficiently. So that augurs well for them, and that's why we're declining. You can't afford to waste that much capital in a society every year. And going back to the cultural thing, one of the reasons why the US did so well is because we were founded on the idea of the Protestant work ethic, a little bit different than the Confucian ethic. I mean, Protestant work ethic is work hard and save and compete. So it's similar in some ways, but it's different. But it doesn't matter. We've lost it. Protestant work ethic doesn't really exist in the US anymore. It's been washed away by, welfare and soft living and all the other things that we're all familiar with. So we don't have the Protestant work ethic anymore, which is what built this country. So I'm pessimistic about the
Me too.
future.
And one of the things that also just concerned me is the idea that if this Chinese professor who said that we have these people in these high positions, that this is why that we've basically been able to do whatever we wanted to do over the last 30 years. If that's true, that they have these people who are kind of just go with the flow, or are interested, their interests are in alignment with China, even if they're not anti-US, their interests are in alignment with them. And then you hear about this woman spy who then is connected and ingratiates herself with elected leaders. It just and then you look at the fact that our political classes, they're all very wealthy. They're all very wealthy, and they all have these like Biden-like deals. Like they seem to do really well in business without a lot of necessarily business acumen. It just seems like that there's not enough core value there. Like there's no values, there's no virtues there, where people are willing to essentially sell their whether they can justify to themselves, but sell their country or sell like things that should be of greater value for trinkets, essentially for some status within the deep state or within our social system in some way, and a nice house and nice cars. It seems crazy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And of course, this is all encouraged by the U.S. government, which is allowing through printing up money Americans to maintain an artificially high standard of living. So with all these trillions of dollars that have gone over to China, they've used it to build their Belt and Road program, which is going to, where probably tens, even hundreds of millions of Chinese are going to wind up migrating to Africa in particular. And meanwhile, Americans are trading their capital away for basically trinkets that are going to wind up in landfills or maybe buried in garages and basements.
Or trailers or the containers, right?
Storage units.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but at the same time, this happens to everybody. Things are too good for too long. Like you saw this movie, Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah.
Okay, who a friend of ours was actually the producer of. And clearly, the very rich overseas Chinese in that case are just as spoiled and degenerate as their equivalents in the US is. So who knows what it's going to all look like in 50 years, but I don't see what's going to stop the descent of the US. And 50 years from now, who's going to come after China? India? I kind of doubt it. So it's kind of up in the air.
At the same time, no one probably imagined it would be the United States. No one probably saw us coming onto the scene as the dominant world power. If you go back to maybe, I don't know, 1900, maybe they didn't see us at that then. It was still the European powers were still so strong. They probably didn't see us coming, and they were like, well, we've missed China. I mean, who knows who it could be. They could just not be on the scene yet at all. I wonder though, if we talked about war, do you think that, we've talked about the war with China, which you expect there will be some kind of a war with China over the next decade, for a lot of reasons. Again, and you said that it will take the form of not just of conventional warfare, like where we have navies and stuff like that, but you talked about biological warfare. You talked about information warfare. I mean, I wonder how much of it all this just makes me think that maybe we are actually in it. And I hate to say this because this is a terrible idea to imagine that we're actually in it, but we don't even understand that it is happening right now. That from the Chinese perspective, maybe it's, they're pursuing it aggressively, but we're just kind of stepping back and thinking that nothing's going on.
Yeah, and let's admit it. The average American, well, including us, for instance, we have more boots on the ground experience in these foreign countries, and we can see things with our own eyes. We don't have to rely on some talking head on a network television show. But frankly, all these people in think tanks in Beijing and Washington both are planning for the next war. And my guess, from everything I can pick up, is that the next war is going to have a very substantial biological component. And it's especially convenient because there are differences between racial groups in everything from typical blood type to all kinds of things. And so if you're a Han Chinese, which are all very much related, not talking about Tibetans, I'm not talking about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, not talking even about the Mongolians. If you're a Han Chinese, which is the important thing, it's the majority of the people there may be enough genetic conditions that you release a virus or perhaps even a bacteria that won't affect somebody with Han Chinese genes, but it'll affect everybody else. Now, I'm sure the Americans at Fort Detrick, which have been working on this for decades, they're well aware of this too. And they all try to, so it's a question of who gets the upper hand, who strikes first. But I think definitely the next war is going to have a real biological component.
We're not supposed to talk about this sort of thing, but I mean, do you think the COVID-19 coronavirus, could that be related to this? I mean, could it be part of
Yeah.
it?
Listen, all we know is what we hear on the grapevine,
Yeah.
the official grapevine on CNN and so forth, and government press releases, and the underground grapevine on the internet. But who knows? I mean, I don't know, but yeah, you hear enough things that it does make you think, gee, this is possible. I mean, nothing's off the table with some of these people. They're genuinely evil. They're genuinely malevolent. So yeah, and they think big. So they could try anything. Who knows?
Hmm. Scary thought. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on what happens with some of these as these Chinese things develop. But it is interesting, and I think that in many ways it seems to me that like you can blame the Chinese people for the ambition of their government, for the ambition of their government, but I think a big part of the problem is that as Americans and our American government, we have no national ambitions of our own, whether it to be back to our core values or even just to compete effectively in the world. It's just so I think a lot of it is self-inflicted wounds at this point.
Yeah, it is. If we didn't have to deal with all the stupidities imposed upon us by the US government, we'd be further ahead of the Chinese than the Chinese are ahead of the Zimbabweans at this point. And that's the answer. But instead, we're relatively, and in some ways, absolutely going backward. So listen, I'm not worried about the Chinese government. I'm worried about the US government, frankly. They're our real enemy in this.
Yeah, seems so. Okay. All right, Doug, I know you're on a short time frame today, so thanks a lot. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, super, Matt. Thanks.